Hello everybody, Andy here from Glass Half Dead, the #1 kill team channel in the world as long as you don't pay attention to facts or logic. So today I'm going to take a look at the final standings for Warhammer World Championships. That's not what it's called. It's right here. World Championships of Warhammer, WCW, that's what it's called. Obviously I'm focusing almost exclusively on kill team, but I will very briefly touch on other things. I want to talk about the game itself. The format of the tournament, followed by the game itself, and then that's kind of it really, yeah. That's all I'm talking about. Let's crack on, shall we? Let's get straight into the actual results of the tournament. Do you need to know about the format of the tournament, maybe? No? There you go. There were 93 players for Kill Team. They played 10 games in total. It was a lot of Kill Team. It was all streamed online for English by Squad Games Entertainment. It was also all streamed online for the Spanish language by Kill Team Mercenarios. All of those streams are still up either on their Twitches or their YouTubes. Squad Games, you need to go to Twitch, and Kill Team Mercenarios, you need to go to YouTube. Go check those out. Obviously, I only watch the Squad Games Entertainment stream because I don't speak a lick of Spanish, but there you go. That does mean that I didn't get to see every single game that was streamed. I only got to see whatever was put on Squad Games. Luckily, everybody got to see the actual final, which was ultimately Dan Barton with Warp Coven versus Javier Escu on Legionary there, because they managed to cram all of the cameras onto the same two things. So if you want to go back and watch that, you can. Yeah, so there you go. Team England, Dan Barton, Warp Coven won. I'm very anti-caring about your country, so I don't care that England won. But it was good to see Dan, who is of course a London local, win. That's cool. And a shame for obviously Escu there for Spain to lose. We can have a quick chat about that game, but when it comes to the rest of the results, if I'm honest, I literally haven't even looked at how the rest went. So my vague understanding is that the top 16 locked in after 6 rounds, and then 7, 8, 9, and then 10 were a top 16 cut, and everybody else went into a Swiss. So essentially what happened, even though BCP doesn't really show it too brilliantly, is, oh, that's what they did. Okay, it wasn't a full Swiss because, for example, Bart and Albert were both in the top 16 cut. So what they did was they did a top 16 cut after 6 games, and then they locked in for the finals 1 to 4, which I think is fair, because otherwise you can get into some very weird situations where you're in the final against the #1 and you come 5th. That's really upsetting. I don't like that. So I actually like that they have gone ahead and locked that in and said, no, this is, if you're in the final, you are 1st and 2nd. I also like that the semi-final was 3rd and 4th. I think they should extend that down further, to be honest, but there you go. Unfortunately, I can't show you the actual placings in the Swiss bracket, because when you click on placings, nothing comes up. So there you go. Great. Very quickly, let's go back to pairings so we can see what that was. It was a little bit odd. There must have been a little bit of miscommunication because when I was watching the stream yesterday, the actual score that they put up at the end was Dan, the Warp Coven, got 16 and Escu got 11. But clearly, there must have been a little bit something wrong because they've put here in BCP 12 versus 11. Don't know why, is what it is. You know, when you're watching a 3.5-hour game, it is a little bit challenging to keep track of things and see what's actually right. You do have to just trust the UI. Right, with that said, super quickly, I am going to talk about how the game itself went for the kill teamers there, but I do want to very quickly point out that 40k had 268 players, Age of Sigmar had 124, Kill Team had 93, and Underworlds had 46, which, considering that I always make fun of Underworlds and saying that nobody ever plays it, that's a pretty good showing for Underworlds actually, especially considering that the new edition of Underworlds launched last weekend. It's not in a good state. Let's move on. We don't need to talk about Underworlds. It's fine. It's fine. It's all good. because as you know, I have more than enough to say about Kill Team and the state of it. I'm going to throw out a few things first, okay? So, let me tell you quickly about the game. So the game it took 3.5 hours, well, 3 hours 40, and both players, you can go check this stuff out if you want. Here we go. So obviously I'm looking at Battle Kit here. You should be using Battle Kit, it's amazing. So both players took Security and Contain. Okay, that's very interesting. And I think it goes to show that it was a very, very cagey match. Both players were really attempting to they weren't aggressive at all. They were doing pure defense, and that's because that's part of Contain. So at the end of each turning point after the first, if there are no enemy operatives wholly within your territory, you score a VP. If there are no enemy operatives wholly within 6 of your drop zone, you score 1 VP. Normally on a map, that means the middle line is typically around 9 inches away, or 8 to 9 inches away. So it kind of gives you that 2-3 inch bubble to get 1 or 2 VP there. And sure enough, both players played really hard into their Contain TAC-op because they moved up to the half board, they ignored the middle objective completely, and just kind of like, well, let's see if he plays aggressive, puts himself out of position, and then I can kill him. Which is totally fine. I think that's a totally valid way to play the game. Like, you know, if you're on the top tables and you do an aggressive move and you fluff the roll, you've probably lost the game. So playing a much more conservative game, a very cagey game, makes total sense. Also, the final match, in case you were wondering, it was Coordinates. The way Coordinates works is you tap an objective once and that gets you a VP at the end of the game. Whether you score it at the end of the game or not doesn't matter because it's locked in once each one is tapped once. Also, if you tap the objective on the enemy's side, of which there will be 1 in every map, then you are locked in for 2 VP. Then throughout the game you can tap that all the points as many times as you want, once per turning point obviously, but you can both tap it once per turning point, I think. Let's not read, who cares? And then at the end of the game, whoever has tapped each objective marker once, gains an additional VP for having done that. There you go. Cool. Right, with that said, the primaries that they both picked, I believe Escu went for Crit Op, so he was playing for the mission, whereas Dan was playing for TAC Op as the primary. Yeah. Oh, so you also want to know, I know you want to know this, what were the actual lists, the rosters, etc. So I'm generally, a lot of people come into my comments, or I see it on Reddit or Facebook saying, what list builder do you use? How do you keep track of your roster? And I'm like, guys, it's not how Kill Team works. It's not how you should think of it. However, these are actually 2 teams where you do want to know what the list is, because you can play Legionary one way or 3 other ways, and it actually plays quite differently. Likewise, Warp Coven does generally seem to pretty much always play the same way, but there's so many things you can do with it, and what loadouts do you want with which magical sorcerer ability. So I can say that for Dan, he made his Temperian Sorcerer, the leader, and he ran 5 rubrics with the Warp Cannon, Soulfire Cannon as the heavy gunner, and 2 Zangors, and he ran that in every single game. And he also, he says, I believe, ran Contain in every single game, and he also had Contain, the TAC-op, as his primary in every single game. Who else was it? Escu. So Escu was playing all Nurgle, which I don't know if he played all Nurgle in every game. However, I will say that into Warp Coven, where literally all of their weapons have piercing 1, you basically have to play Nurgle, so that makes total sense. Even though I, as a casual who didn't make it to Worlds, don't think Nurgle is actually the best option, it is exceptionally good. At that point, he did, however, play the Melter, his 1 gunner, the Melter, as Tzeentch, because with Tzeentch you can do +1 APL, so you get some cool stuff. You can move dash, double shoot, which is very potent. Cool. Anything else to think about with them? No, that's kind of the thing. I did write very quickly. I had some thoughts on their tactics. They're both taking contain, staying away from the centre. Yes. So if you watch the whole game, they waited as long as they could to tap the centre point, because obviously, as I just said, if you play an aggressive game and you're the first one to tap the centre, you basically lose a model, right? And sure enough, both of them had like good melee optives set up, ready to charge the centre. Likewise, Dan had managed to get the side of the board with the very tall, they played on Vulcus, with the very tall, the double vantage point side. And he put his heavy gunner up there, and it just dominated for the entire game, because there you go. Of course it did, right? Of course it did. Again, Vulcus is very, very heavy, dominant, and is anti-shooting. Because of that, that is possibly an issue. However, again, when you get into this kind of back and forth, who wants to start the trade war, if you have a dominant sniper position, you want the enemy to start the trade war, because then you're guaranteed that kill with the gunner, basically. So, there you go. That did happen. Both take contain, didn't want to touch the centre. Both players have ways of charging. Whoever gets on centre, yeah. Very cagey game. The gunner on top of the vantage point was literally untouchable. That's another thing to point out, sorry. Yes, there was literally nothing Escu could have possibly done to ever remove that sorcerer, the heavy gunner there, which again I think is a real flaw of Vulcus. I think that needs to be FAQ'd, because to clarify, there was literally nothing that could have ever been done to remove that heavy gunner. It wasn't a case of he needed better play or a different weapon. He just could never ever have touched that model, which I think is a bit crappy from a mechanics perspective. There you go. Because the 32mm base of the heavy gunner just stops any charge. There you go. Yep. And Legionary don't have any access to Seek Light to be able to get up there. Is that true? Legionary doesn't get any Seek Light? They must get something, but anyway, he didn't have it. Yeah, so one of the big things here was there was a big play. So Escu made a few big plays. Dan even says at the end, being very gracious, of course, that Escu played a better game, and Dan just rolled a lot of sixes, to be honest with you. He didn't say that. I added that bit. That was my own commentary. Dan said, the Warp Government player said that ultimately Escu did play a better, tighter game, but it just didn't go his way because of the melter shot. So Escu made some very good moves. One of the ones was, of course, so because they were playing coordinates, it's very, very important to tap your enemy's objective. That nets you 2 VP, and sure enough, Escu played into that, and he went very hard on Dan's stronghold to get that point tapped, which I think was a very good move. He knew he'd obviously picked the crit op as primary, so he did that very deliberately. It was a good move. Then in turning point 3, he finally moved into the centre, tapped the centre, which again, Dan had not tapped the centre at that point, so getting a point there makes sense, and somebody had to do it, and unfortunately, Dan, because he can take the Zangors, had the activation advantage, so he could have, if he wanted to, hold back for the entire game and wait for Escu to pass everything, then go for the tap, and then it's Dan's game. So ultimately, Escu went in there. He then pushed up pretty hard with a melter. Now, a melter with Zinch is getting to double shoot you, not with a melter. He gets to shoot you once with a melter and then once with a bolt pistol. And he fluffed it. He fluffed it hard. He rolled 1s and 2s. That was it. At that point of the game, you don't have the CP for rerolls. You certainly can't reroll 4 dice, okay? That's just not how the game plays at that level. You just have to deal with what you've done. And he didn't reroll anything. There was no point. Yeah, there you go. So a melter pushes up, does nothing, and that was basically Escu's game lost. He needed that. Yeah, The other thing I want to touch on very briefly is Dan's dice. He rolled hot as balls. I'm going to be honest. Like, he rolled really, really well. That is partly his dice were hot. I would not have allowed those dice on the stream. That's just me. That's just me. However, also, additionally, Warp Coven have access to Relentless. There were many times where he rolled nothing and said, oh, Relentless, and rolled all crits. I'm just going to say, you know, hey, the game, if you roll all crits, kind of easy to win. There you go. And if your opponent makes a big push with the melter and rolls all 1s and 2s, again, kind of easy to win that game. So that's actually really quite upsetting. You know, it is a dice game. It is a dice game, obviously, and the fact that the better player didn't win, I think is quite sad. Yeah, there you go. That's just how it is. Dice happen. Nothing you can do about it. That is the game we're playing. And you know, in my casual noobish way, I'm like, hey, dice win. I'm not a good enough player to convincingly say to my opponent, I am a better player than you. I have played better than you. Okay? But at certain levels, you are able to confidently say, I am the better player. And as Dan said, Escu played the better game, but he lost because of dice. I think that's a little bit sad, a little bit upsetting. There you go. And you know, I think that's quite different at the top tournaments. I don't think dice should decide things. Whereas for me, my casual new player levels, yeah, dice decide things. Cool, that's fine. You know, I'm not good enough to get to the point where I should be able to beat dice. But these guys, in theory, are. Cool. With that said, oh, also, it's just Warp Coven in general. So they have access to Relentless, which is incredibly strong, in case you aren't aware. They also have access to dice fixing. So they have a ploy where they can, they roll 2 dice, and then they can swap any dice in the game, whether it's attack or crit, attack or defense, for one of the 2 dice they just rolled. This is actually quite similar to a 40k ability, but for Eldar. And everybody said that the Eldar were broken when they had that ability, and now we've got that in Kill Team. Nice. Love it. And so what happens is, so not only, let's say your opponent goes in, they roll that crit, that crit on melee, but you, as one of your Twisted Fate dice, you rolled a 1, you can swap their crit for a 1. So not only do they not get a crit in melee, they get a miss. They're screwed. There you go. And you can't re-roll a swapped dice. And likewise, if perhaps when you rolled your fate dice, you rolled 6s, or whatever, a hit, you can swap your dice out. So you go in with your melter, you don't have a melter, ignore that. You go in with your flamer, whatever, your big hitter, and you fluff it. Before you re-roll, you say, okay, I'm going to swap out a 6. I've got a crit, and then I've got Relentless, and Dan did that so many times. There you go. Nothing against Dan there, obviously. Although Dan did generally roll hot, he had the team that allowed him to do that, which is, I think, also part of, you know, picking your team. Dan picked a team that allows you to kind of play against poor dice rolls. Although I'm saying, yes, Dan rolled a lot of crits, he also sometimes fluffed it, but he had a way to get around that fluffing. Dan, a big fluffer, if you will. Right, let's quickly move on to this. This is a meme I made. There we go. There we go. This is the bell curve meme. Noobs on the left, Kill Team takes 4 hours to play. Me, at the top, Kill Team should take 1 hour to play. And then everybody that went to the Warhammer World Championships there, the pro players, Kill Team takes 4 hours to play. So, also note, I used, Dan has a YouTube channel called Captain Kill Team, who obviously you should go and check out. I have no doubt that he will be doing a breakdown of his, not only his final game, but also the entire event. That will be really fun to watch. So go check out Captain Kill Team, that's Dan. The Warp Coven winner of that event that I can't remember the name of. So I'm going to talk about times. And I'm going to talk about the stream a little bit. So we're done with the results. We're done with the game analysis. I want to complain about a few things. Not complain, that's the wrong word, sorry. I'm a huge casual. And I want more casuals in the game because more casuals leads to just more players in general at every level. Not only more casuals, but also more hyper casuals and more top tier pro players. So the more the better. That's my view on it, okay? As such, I think that Kill Team needs a certain level of area, that's not a word, of entry barrier, okay? And wargaming in general tends to have a relatively high entry, not just of like physical, like monetary cost, but also time cost, and also interest cost. So you kind of already have to be in it to watch an unedited battle report, right? Which is what live streams are, in case you weren't aware. That's already a certain level of investment, right? And don't get me wrong, sorry, the Score Games Entertainment stream was brilliant for what it was. Like, genuinely, I think it was probably the best first stream that GW allowed them to do that we've seen so far. It was really well done, great UI. Obviously, they have their own YouTube channel where they've been practicing to do the commentary thing for a while, so go check that out too. And it was good, and it's such a challenging environment to stream in. It's very loud in the hall, and it was a great watch. So there you go. I would recommend you go and check it out. Right, so we need to talk about the format that the players were allowed to play in, the discussion of whether or not that is actually Kill Team, and then also kind of what that means for people wanting to get into Kill Team. So let's quickly go over the format. So the format was 4 hours. The first 6 games were 3-hour rounds, and the last 4 games were 4-hour rounds. Now, this happened last year as well, except every round was 4 rounds, okay? I think, if I'm honest, I'm just throwing it out there, if I'm honest, that's too long. But no game went to time, so that's a slight difference there. However, every game on stream did go over 3 hours. If I play a game that takes 3 hours, I will just concede because I'm fucking bored. Okay? Cool, that's fine. We value different things. There's nothing wrong with that. I personally value speed. I think, sorry, it's a whole philosophy thing. We know that all of these players could have played their games in an hour, right? If GW had come along and said, we're only giving you an hour and a half, they would have set up for 10 minutes and played that game in a smooth hour, no problems, okay? All of the players here were capable of doing that, that's fine. Right, so with that said, we've got to kind of wonder, why do they give 4 hours? Well, there's an easy reason for that, and that's because, simply put, GW likes to marry up their timings across the different events, so Kill Team was actually on a 40k timer. So I think that's a terrible, terrible, terrible decision, because if you give these players 4 hours, they will take 4 hours to play the game. This final game, it was tense, it was cagey, there was drama, there were hot dice, there were cold dice, it was amazing, it was an amazing game, it was a masterclass of play. If it was an hour. As it is, it was one of the most boring things I've ever watched. Now, that's my take. And I have to assume that if you're not as into Kill Team as I am, and you go on to that stream thinking, oh, Kill Team, this is the highest level of play imaginable. What do I know about Kill Team? It's 40k, but it's smaller and faster and cheaper. Cool. Fuck me. Nothing happened for 10 minutes at a time. The only thing that happened for 10 minutes at a time was they measured different things. They measured everything on the board. Oh, it was so boring. Don't get me wrong, that's the game that they were allowed to play by GW. This is not a fault on the players. As I just said, they could have played this in an hour. They could have smashed it out. I also don't blame the players for not being great presenters. That's not what they're there to do. We had the players mixed up, which I think a lot of people do actually like. You want to hear what the real players actually say to each other. You can kind of learn how you should be playing a game. And sure enough, they were always playing by intent. But it was literally 20 minutes between moves at times. Setup. Let me give you a few time breaks, time stamps for you. The game was 4 hours, but it took 3 hours and 40 minutes. Cool. After turn 1, GW, the TOs brought in a chess clock for the players because they took an hour and a half for turn 1. Chaps. Chapesses and chapai. What are you doing? That's insane. The new edition of Kill Team is a faster game than the last edition, okay? They sped up deployment. Not for these guys. Oh my God, it was painful. Don't get me wrong, I watched the whole thing. I was enjoying it enough to watch it, but not because of what was on the screen. I was enjoying the chat. I was enjoying having a chat about it with other players. The game was dull because nothing happened in a time that it was interesting. As I say, the game itself was tense, there was drama, it was cagey, it was a real masterclass of play, but not over 3 hours and 40 minutes. And I genuinely think, everything did happen when it should happen, it just took much longer for it to occur. So in chat, we were all joking that they hadn't rolled a dice yet. And of course they hadn't rolled a dice, because it was still turning point 1. No top player is going to give another player a shot on turning point 1. That just doesn't happen. So that's fine. We wouldn't expect it. However, the first dice roll was not until 2 hours and 8 minutes into the game. That's mad. That's literally mad. The first shot did happen when it should have happened, just a lot longer after. Cool. Now, with that said, the point I'm trying to get to here is that I genuinely think that as a way to present Kill Team to players, a 4-hour format is incorrect. And again, I'm blaming GW exclusively for this. Not the players, not the streamers, anything like that. I truly believe that Kill Team is the better game than 40k. However, part of that is ultimately because of the time it takes to play. If 40k takes 4 hours and Kill Team takes 4 hours, I'd rather play 40k because it looks better. If I'm not playing 2 games of Kill Team in the time it takes to play 40k, it's still the better game. It's still the more tactical game, but I'd probably, at that point, be outswayed by how cool 40k looks. And I'd probably play that, because I'm going to get bored. And I think that if we're not playing a fast, reactive skirmish game to draw people in, we're not really presenting Kill Team in the way it's supposed to be presented. And I think that we are genuinely doing a disservice to the game and to new players trying to get into Kill Team. End of sentence. We are doing a disservice for it. There you go. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. We don't need to look at this meme anymore. Do go and follow Captain Kill Team. There you go. There you go. There you go. That's all I have to say, really. I was just... It's great that I can intellectually say, I'm an intellectual, that I can say the game was good, it was full of drama, it was tense, there were high rolls and low rolls. Unfortunately, they were one-sided. Dan had the high rolls, Escu had the low rolls. Unfortunate, but that's dice going to be dice going to dice, right? But I genuinely think we are doing a disservice. GW is doing a disservice to the game by giving it that long of a time. Now, why are they doing this? They're doing this because they don't believe in chess clocks and they want to keep everything kind of linked up time-wise, so that's why we have 4 hours. But I legitimately think it's just not the way to show Kill Team, because these players will take 4 hours. There you go. That's it. I realise I'm harping on the point now, and you guys are bored. I have nothing used to say to that. But very genuinely, if they had played that game, and they could have played an almost identical game in an hour. Hour and a half. Hour and a half. They could have played an almost identical game. The same things would have occurred. There you go. But instead, we had it in Twitch chat. Like somebody came in and said, oh, I'm new. I'm just watching this game. I was like, oh, you know, everyone's very friendly, very approaching. You know, the chat was lovely. And we're like, oh, welcome to the game, right? Nothing happened in the game for 10 minutes. And we're all joking about it because it's hilarious, but like, it's not good. If I was new to Kill Team and I dropped in, or, you know, forget Kill Team, like, you know, let's say there's Malifaux or Infinity or War Machine or something that I don't actually know the rules of, and nothing's happening, I'm not going to continue watching. I'm like, okay, well, fine, it's not for me, and I'll move on. And I really think that GW, specifically Kill Team, is relying a little bit too heavily on the fact that people are already bought into the IP because of 40k, because of Warhammer in general, and it's kind of resting on its laurels when it comes to putting across how exciting and good the system can be. There you go. All right, I'm done. Whatever, you get it. I do want to mention one more thing. We're moving on from times. So obviously, Kill Team can be a very, very tight game. I like to think of Kill Team as a game of inches. But of course, when you're at that level, it's a game of millimeters, okay? However, both players, and this isn't really a fault to the players, okay? They've done 10 rounds of Kill Team. They've played solidly, you know, 8 hours a day, longer than that, whatever, for 4 days in a row. They're on their 10th game. They're on stream. It's very nerve-wracking. There's a lot on the line, you know, so like, this is in no way shade to the players. You and I have done it as well, and there's no pressure on us. They knocked the shit out of that terrain, lads. I'm not even joking. If you go to the stream and you look at the opening setup of the terrain of that game, and then you skip to the end of the stream, and you see the closing setup of that terrain, it's a different fucking board. Like, Jesus Christ. So, that's fine. I knock terrain all the time. Like, if you've ever seen me on stream, if you've seen one of my battle reports, hashtag same, bro. So, that's fine. Issue. This can be mitigated by GW. Put blue tack on the bottom of your terrain. Will it fix everything? No. Because these guys were really, they were beating that terrain like it was their wife. Woo! I wish I hadn't said that, but I'm not going to edit this. They were smacking the shit out of that terrain. I'm not even lying. It was mad. We had entire ruins knocked over with the sweep of a hand. I was like, ugh. We had models falling off terrain. Cool, not a problem. That's real life. That's how it works. However, after, and this happened very specifically, I think it was on the Melter shot, okay, which ultimately lost Escu the game, probably, most likely, right? Somebody, I don't know who, doesn't matter who, knocked that ruin over. The sorcerer fell off, okay? Cool. And then Escu goes to take the shot. And it's like, oh, no, you're not in. You're not in, are you? It's like, what the fuck do you mean? It's a question of a few millimeters. Escu can almost make it, and I said, well, no, you can't quite make it. Ultimately, they had to get a TO over. TO over said, yes, you could make it. It was fine. But it's like, what are you talking about? The ruin was just knocked. I genuinely think that at that point, after the game state, the board state has been knocked to such a degree to then make a claim over millimeters, denying or not denying a shot, you have no ground to stand on. I think it's a bit of a piss take, if I'm honest. And I think that at that point, after you've literally knocked a ruin over and dislodged a model halfway across the board and just put it back kind of where it should be, you've got like a half-inch leniency from me. That's what I'm saying. I'm like, you know what? I don't know where that was, to be honest with you. I don't know which notch of the terrain grid it was on. So, half-inch. And I think that's kind of the way the game needs to be played. So it was actually very frustrating to see such time-intensive movements being made and like discussing millimeters. Can I get around that operative? Can I get to within an inch of that operative for the charge? Can I? And it's like, none of this terrain is where it was. I don't know. It feels like that should be accounted for in some way, which is obviously very difficult because Kill Team is ultimately a very lethal game, unless you roll 1s and 2s with a melter, obviously. And that's just a little bit upsetting that both of the players and the TOs could see how much the game had changed from how it should be, the game state, sorry. And yet was still being really, really anal about the measurements. And it's like, I understand why. I'd be the same. Just to clarify, I'm just kind of saying I wish that the game didn't have to be that way. Cool. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there as well, because as I was watching the stream for 4 hours, that was something that came up a lot of terrain knocking. And again, it happens in my games all the time, your games all the time. Everybody knocks terrain, not a big deal. But to then continue to keep it as a game of millimeters, I think is a little bit of a shame. There you go. Cool. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. Stay hydrated. I've got to go pick my car up.